There's a mistake people make that looks harmless, even smart at first. They talk too much about themselves. Not in an obvious way. Not bragging. Not showing off. Just sharing, explaining, opening up more than they should. It feels honest. It feels natural. But slowly, it starts costing them something. Respect, control, peace of mind. Because not everything in your life is meant to be shared. Some things lose their strength the moment they're spoken out loud. And the truth is, the more you reveal without thinking, the more you give other people something to use, judge, or misunderstand. This isn't about becoming secretive or cold. It's about knowing what deserves to stay private. Because silence, when used right, is not weakness, it's control. And once you understand that, you start moving differently. You stop explaining everything. You stop seeking approval. You stop giving people access to parts of your life they haven't earned. So let's get into it. Not in a dramatic way. Just clearly. 5 things you should never reveal if you want to stay grounded, respected, and in control. Most people think sharing their plans is a sign of clarity. They believe that speaking about their goals makes them more real, more defined, more likely to happen. It feels like progress. It sounds like commitment. And in the moment it gives a sense of direction. But there's a quiet problem hidden inside that habit. The moment you start explaining your plans to others, something shifts in your mind. You move from building to describing, from doing to talking, and that shift is small, but it changes everything over time. When you speak about what you're going to do, your brain reacts as if you've already taken a step forward. You feel a kind of satisfaction, even though nothing has actually been done yet. That feeling reduces the urgency to act. It softens the pressure that normally pushes you to follow through. So instead of moving with intensity, you move with comfort. And comfort doesn't build anything. This is why many people stay stuck in cycles of planning and talking without real execution. They keep repeating their ideas, refining their explanations, discussing possibilities, but the actual work remains delayed. It doesn't feel like procrastination, it feels like preparation, but in reality it's avoidance. There's also another layer to this. When your plans stay private, they remain clear. They belong to you. They are shaped by your own thinking, your own direction, your own pace. The moment you share them, other opinions enter. Some people will respond with doubt, not always directly. Sometimes it's just a small question, a slight hesitation, a subtle shift in tone. Are you sure that's the best idea? That sounds difficult. Have you thought about doing something safer? These reactions don't seem strong, but they plant something in your mind, a small uncertainty, a slight hesitation, and now instead of moving forward with confidence, you start adjusting. You rethink your plan, you try to make it sound more reasonable. You start explaining it more clearly, trying to get approval instead of focusing on execution. That's how clarity gets diluted. Not in one moment, but slowly, through repeated exposure to outside opinions. Even positive reactions can create problems. When people praise your ideas, when they show excitement, when they tell you how impressive it sounds, it creates another kind of distraction. You begin to enjoy the reaction, you start looking forward to that response, and without realizing it, your motivation shifts. You're no longer driven by the work itself, you're driven by how people respond to your ideas. That makes your progress unstable, because now your energy depends on something outside of you. And external validation is never consistent. Some days it's there, some days it's not. When it disappears, your drive weakens. That's why it's better to keep your plans quiet, especially in the early stages. When something is still developing, it needs focus, not attention. It needs time, not discussion. It needs action, not explanation. Another important point is this. Not everyone around you wants to see you succeed. This doesn't always come from bad intentions. Sometimes it comes from insecurity, sometimes from fear, sometimes from their own limitations. But the result is the same. They project their doubts onto you. They question your direction. They respond in ways that slowly weaken your confidence. And if you're not careful, you start absorbing that. You start thinking within their limits instead of your own. That's why protecting your plans is not about secrecy. It's about maintaining your mental space. Your direction should be shaped by your thinking, not by random opinions. Once your plans become solid, Once your actions create real results, then it's different. At that point, your work speaks for itself. No need to defend. Results remove doubt. They remove the need for discussion. And they create a different kind of respect. Quiet respect. The kind that doesn't come from what you say, but from what you've done. Now think about how different your approach becomes when you stop talking about your plans. You spend less time explaining and more time working. You think less about how things sound and more about how they function. You move faster because you're not waiting for feedback. You correct mistakes quickly because you're not trying to protect an idea you've already announced. There's more freedom in silence, more clarity, more control. You're not divided between action and explanation. You're fully focused on the process. And that focus is what creates progress. This doesn't mean you should never share anything with anyone. It means you become selective. You choose carefully who you speak to. Someone who understands your direction. Someone who adds clarity instead of confusion. Someone who doesn't try to reshape your path based on their own fears. But those people are rare. Most conversations don't help. They just add noise. So it's better to limit what you share until your work has taken shape. There's also a timing element. Ideas are fragile in the beginning. They can change easily. They can be influenced easily. If you expose them too early, they lose their original form. But once they've been developed through action, they become stable. They don't depend on opinions anymore. They stand on their own. That's when sharing becomes different. At that point, you're not looking for approval. You're simply presenting what already exists. That's a position of strength. Now bring this into your own life. Feel the urge to talk about what you're planning. It might come from excitement. It might come from wanting support. It might come from wanting recognition. Pause in that moment. Ask yourself honestly, am I saying this because it helps me move forward, or because it feels good to say it? If it's just a feeling, keep it to yourself. Use that energy for action instead, because action is what turns ideas into something real. Nothing else does. Not discussion, not explanation, not validation. Only consistent effort. And that effort is easier to maintain when your mind is not scattered, when your attention is not divided, when your direction is clear. That's what silence gives you. It protects your focus. It keeps your energy where it matters. It removes unnecessary influence, and it allows your plans to grow without interference. Over time, this becomes natural. You stop feeling the need to explain everything. You become more comfortable working quietly. You rely less on external reactions. You trust your own process more. And that changes how you move. You become more steady, more direct, more controlled. Not because you're forcing it, but because your attention is in the right place. That's the real shift. So keep your long-term plans to yourself, especially in the beginning. Work on them without announcing them. Build without explaining every step. Let your actions develop without interruption. And when the results start to show, you won't need to say much. People will see it. They'll understand it. And it will carry more weight than anything you could have said. Because real progress doesn't need words to prove it. Itself, at P. Quietly but clearly. End. There's a strong urge to talk when something feels heavy. When your mind is full, when things don't make sense, when you feel pressure building up inside, the first instinct is to release it by speaking, to explain what's going on, to let someone else hear it. It feels like relief. And sometimes it is, but only when it's shared with the right person. The problem is, most of the time, people don't make that distinction. They speak too quickly to whoever is available, without thinking about the long-term effect. And that's where things start to shift in ways you don't immediately notice. When you share your struggles with someone who doesn't understand you, they don't see the full picture. They don't see your strength, your effort, your direction. They only see a moment of weakness. And people tend to remember that. Not always consciously, not always in a negative way, but it changes how they see you. A conversation that felt temporary to you becomes part of their perception. They start to associate you with that moment. Your words don't disappear after you say them. They stay in someone else's mind. That's why being careful about what you share and who you share it with matters more than most people think. This doesn't mean you should keep everything inside. That's not healthy either. But there's a difference between expressing something and exposing yourself in the wrong place. Let's break that down. When you're going through something difficult, your mind is not at its clearest. Emotions are high, thoughts are scattered. You're trying to understand what's happening while also feeling it at the same time. In that state, it's easy to overshare. You say more than you need to. You explain things in a way that doesn't fully represent you. And the person listening takes that version as the truth. Just the version you presented in that moment. That's why timing matters. Not every feeling needs to be expressed immediately. Sometimes it's better to sit with it first, to understand it, to let it settle, so that when you do speak, you're not just reacting. You're communicating clearly. Another important point is this. Not everyone knows how to handle someone else's struggles. Some people will try to help, but end up giving advice that doesn't apply to your situation. Some will listen but not really understand. Some will compare your situation to theirs and shift the focus. And some will use what you shared later. Not always in an obvious way. Sometimes it shows up as subtle judgment, a change in tone, a lack of respect that wasn't there before. They may not say anything directly, but the way they interact with you changes. And now something that was temporary has affected how they see you long term. That's why being selective is important. You don't need a large circle of people to talk to. You need the right person. Someone who listens without judging. Someone who understands without interrupting. Someone who doesn't take your vulnerability and turn it into a label. But those people are rare. And until you find someone like that, it's better to keep certain things to yourself. Not out of fear, out of awareness, because protecting your mental space matters. There's also something else to understand. Talking about your struggles too often can trap you in them. Every time you repeat the same problem, you relive it. You reinforce it in your mind. You keep it active. Instead of moving forward, you stay connected to it. That's why it's important to balance expression with movement. If you share something once, fine. If it helps you understand it better, that's useful. But repeating it again and again without action doesn't solve anything. It just keeps you in the same place. Another layer to this is identity. When you talk about your struggles too openly, especially to multiple people, it starts to shape how you see yourself. You begin to identify with the problem. You start thinking of yourself in terms of what you're going through, instead of who you are beyond it. That limits you, because now your mindset is tied to the struggle, not to growth. Keeping things more private allows you to process them without turning them into your identity. You deal with them, learn from them, and move on, without making them a defining part of who you are. Now let's be clear. There are moments when sharing is necessary, when something is too heavy to carry alone, when you need perspective, when you need support. That's real. But even then, choose carefully. Don't speak just to feel heard. Speak to someone who can actually understand, someone who won't distort what you're saying, someone who won't use it later. Because once something is said, you can't take it back. It exists in someone else's memory, and you don't control how they use it. So think before you speak. Not in a fearful way, in a thoughtful way. Ask yourself, does this person have the ability to understand this? Will this conversation actually help me move forward, or am I just trying to release emotion quickly? If it's just emotional release, find another way. Write it down, sit with it, think it through. Give yourself time to understand what you're feeling before turning it into words for someone else. Because once it becomes words, it becomes something others can interpret, and their interpretation may not match your reality. There's also strength in handling certain things quietly. Not everything needs an audience. Some struggles are better faced internally. Not because you have to suffer in silence, but because solving them yourself builds a different kind of strength. You learn how to manage your thoughts. You learn how to stay steady under pressure. You learn how to move forward without relying on constant support. That kind of strength stays with you. It doesn't depend on other people, and that's valuable. Because life won't always give you someone to talk to at the exact moment you need it. So building that internal stability matters. Over time, this changes how you deal with problems. You don't react immediately. You don't rush to explain everything. You take a moment, you process, you understand, then you decide what needs to be shared, and what doesn't. That's control, not suppression, not isolation, just awareness. And with that awareness, you protect your peace, you protect your image, and more importantly, you protect your ability to grow without unnecessary interference. So keep your struggles private, unless you're sure the person you're speaking to deserves to hear them. Not everyone does, and that's okay. Because not every part of your life is meant to be shared. Some parts are meant to be handled quietly, and that quiet strength is what keeps you steady. H2. Doing something good feels natural when it comes from the right place. H2. Helping someone without expecting anything back. Supporting quietly. Giving your time, your effort, your attention when it's needed. There's a certain clarity in those moments. You're not thinking about how it looks. You're not thinking about recognition. You just act. But the moment you start talking about it, something shifts. Not always in an obvious way. Sometimes it's subtle. You mention it casually. You bring it up in conversation. You let people know what you did. It might not even feel like you're seeking attention. It might feel like you're just sharing. But that small shift changes the nature of the action. Because now it's not just about what you did. It's about how it's seen. And once that enters the picture, the value of the act starts to change. When something is done quietly, it builds something internal. Discipline, integrity, self-respect. You know what you did. That's enough. There's no need for validation. But when you start speaking about your good deeds, you move that value outside. You start depending, even slightly, on how others respond. You notice their reactions. You pay attention to their tone. You expect a certain level of appreciation. And if it's not there, something feels off. That's where things become unstable. Because now your sense of value is tied to something you don't control. Other people's reactions. Some will appreciate it. Some won't. Some might question it. Some might not care at all. And each of those responses affects you differently. That's why it's better to keep your good actions private. Not because they should be hidden, but because they don't need to be announced. There's also another side to this. When you talk about your good deeds, people start questioning your intention. Even if your intention was pure, they might think you're doing it for attention, for approval, for recognition. You can't control that perception. And once that doubt enters, it changes how people see your actions. Something that was genuine becomes questionable in their eyes. And now the focus is no longer on the act itself. It's on why you did it. That's unnecessary, because the act already had value. It didn't need explanation. There's also a personal cost to this. When you talk about your good deeds repeatedly, you start forming an identity around them. You begin to see yourself as someone who does good. At first that sounds positive, but it can lead to something else. You start expecting to be seen that way. You expect people to recognize it, and when they don't, it creates frustration. Not because the act lost its value, but because your expectation wasn't met. That's how something simple becomes complicated. So instead of focusing on how your actions are seen, bring your focus back to why you're doing them. If the reason is clear, you don't need to talk about it. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to remind anyone. You just do it and move on. That kind of behavior builds something stronger than recognition. It builds consistency, because your actions are not dependent on attention. They're consistent, whether anyone sees them or not. That's real discipline. Another important point is this. Not every good deed needs to be remembered. Sometimes once it's done, it should be left behind. If you keep bringing it up, if you keep reminding people of what you did, it loses its weight. It starts to feel like a transaction, like you're keeping track, and that changes how others experience it. Instead of feeling supported, they might feel pressured. Instead of feeling helped, they might feel like they owe you something. That's not the purpose. So once you do something good, let it stay in the past. Don't carry it forward in conversation. Don't use it as a reference. Just leave it. That keeps your actions clean. There's also something deeper here. When you stop talking about your good deeds, you remove ego from the process. You're no longer doing things to maintain an image. You're doing them because they align with who you are. That creates internal stability. Your actions are not influenced by how they will be perceived. They're based on your own standard. And that standard doesn't change based on external reactions. That's where strength comes from. Not from being seen as good, but from being consistent in your actions, regardless of who's watching. Now, this doesn't mean you never speak about helping someone. There are situations where it's relevant, where it's part of a larger conversation, where it serves a purpose beyond recognition. But even then, the way you speak about it matters. You don't highlight yourself. You don't make it the focus. You keep it simple. Because the moment you start emphasizing it, the tone changes. And people can feel that. They can sense when something is being shared naturally and when it's being presented for approval. That difference matters. Another thing to consider is how silence changes your mindset. When you don't talk about your good deeds, you don't replay them in your mind for validation. You don't depend on feedback. You just act and move forward. That keeps your attention on the present, on what needs to be done next, instead of what you've already done. That's important, because growth comes from forward movement, from holding on to past actions. Now think about how often people remind others of what they've done. Big things, repeatedly brought up. It creates a certain tension. It makes interactions feel less natural, because there's always a sense of something being kept track of. You don't want that. You want your actions to be free from that weight, and the easiest way to do that is to stop talking about them. Just do what needs to be done, then move on. There's a quiet confidence in that. You're not looking for acknowledgement. You're not trying to build an image. You're just acting according to your values, and that kind of behavior stands out more than anything you could say. People notice it over time, not because you told them, but because it's consistent. And consistency is more powerful than any explanation. Now bring this into your own behavior. The next time you do something good, pause before mentioning it. Ask yourself, do I need to say this? Does it add anything meaningful? Or am I looking for a reaction? Be honest. If it's just for a reaction, keep it to yourself. Let the action be enough. Because it is. And over time, this changes how you see things. You stop needing recognition. You stop expecting appreciation. You act because it's right, not because it will be seen. That's where real integrity is built. Not in what you say, in what you do quietly. So keep your good deeds private. Let them shape you internally. Let them build your character without turning them into something external. Because the moment you remove the need to be seen, your actions become stronger, more consistent, more real. Everyone has them. Areas where you hesitate. Things you're not fully confident about. Parts of yourself you're still working on. That's normal. No one is completely steady in every area of life. There are always gaps, always things being developed, always something that feels uncertain. The mistake is not having weaknesses. The mistake is revealing them to the wrong people. Because once something personal like that is exposed in the wrong place, it doesn't stay neutral. It changes how people see you. Not always in an obvious way, not always immediately, but it shifts something. When you openly talk about your insecurities to people who haven't earned that level of trust, you give them a version of you that's incomplete. They don't see your effort, your progress, your intention. They only see the weak point. And that becomes the reference. Even if they don't say anything, it affects how they respond to you later. You repeat your insecurities out loud. You reinforce them. You make them more real in your mind. You give them more attention. You start identifying with them. Instead of seeing them as temporary, you start seeing them as part of who you are. That's limiting, because now your thinking is shaped by something that was supposed to be improved, not fixed in place. Keeping certain things private allows you to work on them without turning them into your identity. You deal with them internally, you improve quietly, and once they're no longer weaknesses, there's nothing to explain. They've already changed. There's also a power dynamic involved here. When people know your weak points, it affects how they interact with you. Some will avoid certain topics around you. Some will treat you more carefully. Some will unconsciously take advantage of that information. And some will test it. They might bring up situations where your insecurity shows. They might push in small ways. Not always intentionally, but it happens. And now you're in a position where you have to manage not just your own thoughts, but their reactions as well. That adds unnecessary pressure. You don't need that. Another layer to this is respect. Respect is influenced by how you present yourself, not by pretending to be perfect, but by maintaining control over what you reveal and when. When you reveal too much too soon, especially things that show uncertainty, it can reduce how seriously people take you. Because they don't see your full capability, they see the hesitation, they see the doubt, and that becomes their focus. That doesn't mean you have to hide everything. It means you share at the right time, with the right person in the right way. There's a difference between controlled vulnerability and careless exposure. Controlled vulnerability is intentional. It's shared with someone who understands. It's expressed clearly, without confusion. It has a purpose. Careless exposure is different. It happens quickly. It's driven by emotion. It's shared without thinking about the impact. And that's what creates problems. So the goal is not to suppress what you feel. It's to manage how and where you express it. Now let's talk about strength. Real strength is not about pretending you have no weaknesses. It's about handling them without losing control. It's about working on them without needing constant validation. It's about improving quietly, without turning every internal struggle into a public discussion. That kind of strength builds confidence, because you're not dependent on how others respond. You're focused on your own progress, and that progress becomes visible over time, not through words, through behavior, through consistency, through how you handle situations that used to affect you. That's when people notice the difference. Not because you told them, but because they see it. And that creates a different kind of respect. Now think about your own behavior. How often do you feel the urge to explain something you're insecure about? To justify it, to get reassurance, to make it feel lighter by speaking about it. Pause in that moment. Ask yourself, is this the right person to share this with? Will this help me improve or just make me feel better temporarily? Am I expressing this clearly or just reacting emotionally? If the answer is not clear, it's better to wait. Give yourself time to understand what you're feeling. Process it internally. Work on it. Because once you understand it better, you won't feel the same need to talk about it. You'll be focused on improving it instead. There's also value in solving things on your own. Not everything requires external input. Some things are better handled internally, because that builds independence. You learn how to manage your thoughts. You learn how to stay steady even when something feels uncertain. You learn how to improve without needing constant reassurance. That's important, because life won't always provide the right person at the right time. So having that internal stability matters. Over time, this approach changes how you move. You become more composed. You don't react quickly. You don't explain everything. You choose what to share and what to keep. That control affects how others see you, but more importantly, it affects how you see yourself. You become more confident, not because everything is perfect, but because you know you're handling things properly. Quietly, steadily, without unnecessary exposure. So keep your weak points and insecurities private, until they are understood, managed, or shared with someone who truly deserves to hear them. Not everyone does, and that's okay. Because not every part of you is meant to be open to everyone. Some parts are meant to be protected, and in that protection you build strength. The kind that doesn't need to be explained. The kind that shows itself through how you carry yourself. Calm, controlled, unshaken. There's a quiet habit that weakens clarity more than people realize. Saying what you're about to do before you do it. It feels harmless. You're just updating someone, letting them know your next step, sharing what's coming. But the moment you speak it, something changes. Your focus splits. Instead of moving forward with full attention, part of your mind shifts toward how it will be seen, how it will be received, how it might be judged. And that's where control starts to slip. Your next move should be simple. You see what needs to be done. You decide. You act. That's it. No extra layer, no explanation, no performance. But when you start talking about it too early, it becomes something else. It becomes an idea that needs to be maintained in front of others. Now you're not just acting for the outcome, you're acting while being aware that people know what you said, and that awareness adds pressure. You start thinking about how it will look if it works. You start thinking about how it will look if it doesn't. You adjust your behavior slightly, trying to match the version you presented. That's not clarity, that's influence, and it takes you away from what actually matters. Your next move is not something that needs attention, it needs execution. There's also another issue. When you speak about your next step too soon, you give yourself a false sense of progress. It feels like you've already moved forward, like you've already taken action, but you haven't, you've only described it. And that small satisfaction reduces the urgency to actually do it. So instead of moving with focus, you slow down, not because you decided to, but because your mind already feels partially rewarded. This is how consistency breaks, not through big failures, through small shifts in behavior that reduce action over time. Another layer to this is uncertainty. Before any action, there's always a level of unknown, exactly how things will go. You don't know every outcome, that's normal, but when you keep your next move private, you handle that uncertainty internally. You adapt, you adjust, you learn as you go. Your attention stays on the process. The moment you share it, the uncertainty becomes something others can question. They might ask why you're doing it. They might suggest alternatives. They might express doubt. And now your mind is dealing with more than just the action. It's dealing with opinions. Even if those opinions are small, they add noise. They make you think more than you need to. They slow your decision-making. They reduce your clarity. That's why it's better to move quietly, not because you're hiding anything, but because your attention stays where it should be, on the action itself. There's also something else that happens when you stop announcing your next move. You become more flexible. You can change direction without needing to explain it. You can adjust your approach without feeling like you're contradicting what you said earlier. You're not locked into a version of your plan. You're free to respond to reality as it unfolds. That's a strong position to be in, because real progress requires adjustment. Things don't always go as expected. Plans change, new information appears, better options come up. If you've already announced your next step, you might feel pressure to stick to it, even when it no longer makes sense. That's how people stay committed to the wrong direction, not because they don't see the issue, but because they've already said what they're going to do. So instead of adjusting, they continue, and that leads to wasted time and effort. Your next move, private, removes that pressure. You act based on what works, not based on what you said. That's clarity. Another important point is this. When you don't talk about your next move, your results carry more weight. There's no build-up, no expectation, no repeated explanation. People don't hear about it before it happens. They see it after it's done. And that creates a different kind of impact. It's direct, it's real, it doesn't rely on words. That's stronger than any explanation, because it's based on action, not intention. Now think about how often people announce what they're about to do. They say it casually, they mention it in conversation, they bring it up multiple times, and then when it doesn't happen, they either explain why, or they quietly move on. Either way, it weakens their credibility, not in a dramatic way, but over time, because words without action lose weight. And once that happens, even when they say something real, it's not taken as seriously. You don't want that pattern. You want your words to mean something. And the best way to do that is to reduce unnecessary talk. Speak less about what you're going to do. Do more. Then let your actions carry the message. That builds trust, not just with others, with yourself. Because every time you act without needing to announce it, you reinforce a simple idea. I move when I decide to move. Not when it's convenient to say it, not when it sounds good, but when it needs to be done. That creates internal stability. You're focused on execution. There's also a calmness in this approach. When you're not explaining your next step, your mind stays quieter. You're not thinking about how to present it. You're not replaying conversations. You're not imagining reactions. Your attention stays on what you're doing. That reduces stress. It reduces distraction. It makes your actions more direct. That's how progress becomes consistent. Now, this doesn't mean you never communicate your next move. There are situations where it's necessary. Work environments, team settings, situations where coordination is required. In those cases, communication is part of the process. But even then, it's clear and limited. It's not about expressing everything. It's about sharing what's needed. That's the difference. You're not talking for the sake of talking. You're speaking with purpose. Outside of those situations, silence is often more effective. It protects your focus. It keeps your direction clear. It removes unnecessary influence. And it allows you to act without pressure. Now bring this into your own behavior. The next time you feel the urge to say what you're about to do, pause. Ask yourself, does this need to be said right now? Will this help me act or just make me feel like I've acted? If it's just giving you a temporary sense of progress, don't say it. Keep it. Act on it instead. Because action is what creates results. Not explanation. Not intention. Not discussion. Just action. And when that action is done quietly, without distraction, it becomes stronger, more focused. That's the goal. So keep your next move to yourself. Decide clearly. Act directly. Adjust when needed, and let the results speak. Because when your actions replace your words, your presence changes. You become more steady, more controlled, more reliable. Not because you say more, but because you say less and do more. And that's what actually builds strength.